The academy courtyard was alive with sound. Hundreds of young alien cadets stood in neat rows, their scales, fur, or metallic armor gleaming under the twin suns. Each one held a weapon that looked like a piece of the future, sleek rifles with glowing barrels, humming with raw energy. The cadets whispered to one another, full of excitement, eager to prove their strength in front of the commanders. In the middle of the formation stood a single human cadet. Unlike the others, he carried no rifle, no shield generator, not even a plasma blade. Instead, in his hands rested something so simple that the crowd could hardly believe it was real. A coil of rough, brown rope. The fibers looked dry and ordinary, nothing like the shining weapons of the others. The laughter started almost immediately. "Look at him," one cadet said, his sharp teeth flashing as he grinned. "Does he plan to strangle the canyon?" Another snorted. "Maybe he thinks this is still his death world, hunting animals with rope instead of using real tools." The human did not react. He stood calmly, his eyes steady, his hands gently testing the rope as if it were more precious than all their weapons combined. At the far end of the courtyard, Commander Therex stepped forward. His massive frame and silver-plated armor demanded silence, and instantly, the cadets stopped laughing. The commander's 4 crimson eyes scanned the group, then fixed for a moment on the human. Unlike the cadets, Therex's face showed no mockery. If anything, there was a spark of curiosity in his gaze. "Cadets," his deep voice thundered, shaking the stone pillars that surrounded the yard. "Today is not about who has the strongest weapon. Today is about survival. Your assignment will test how you adapt, how you think, and how you endure when your technology fails you." A low murmur spread among the cadets. Their confidence dimmed slightly. They had trained with rifles, not with bare hands. But pride burned strong, and many still believed nothing could challenge their power. The ground trembled, and with a loud metallic groan, the training gates opened. Before the cadets stretched a canyon carved deep into the planet's surface. It was wide, dark, and full of danger. The cliffs crumbled under violent winds, and jagged rocks jutted out like broken teeth. At the bottom swirled shadows too deep to see. The commander's voice cut through the roar of the wind. "Your task is simple. Cross the canyon and reach the platform on the far side. Show me your strength." The cadets roared with excitement. One by one, they raised their rifles. Bright energy bolts shot into the canyon walls, carving ledges, blasting away stone to form rough bridges. The air filled with light, heat, and smoke. The cadets cheered as they advanced step by step, their rifles tearing the canyon into a path. But every shot shook the cliffs. Whole sections collapsed into the abyss, undoing their progress. Dust clouds blinded them, the sound of falling rock echoing like thunder. In the middle of this chaos, the human still stood at the edge, holding his rope. He had not moved, had not fired, had not even spoken. His eyes studied the canyon. Every gust of wind, every shadow, every rock formation. The other cadets noticed and laughed again, but this time their laughter was mixed with nervousness. "Is he frozen in fear?" one called out. Another sneered. "Maybe he's waiting for us to carry him across." The human ignored them. He knelt beside a thick stone pillar at the canyon's edge and wrapped the rope around it. His fingers moved with practiced ease, tying a knot so firm it looked like part of the rock itself. Then, with steady hands, he swung the rope out over the canyon. The first attempt fell short, and the rope dangled helplessly. A few cadets laughed louder, but the human pulled it back, adjusted his aim, and swung again. This time, the rope looped around a jagged rock outcrop across the gap. He pulled it tight, tested the hold, and then gave a small nod. Now the cadets fell silent. With no hesitation, the human gripped the rope, braced his boots against the cliff, and pushed off. His body swung into the air, the rope carrying him like a pendulum over the abyss. The wind howled, rocks tumbled down into the endless dark, but he held firm, his arms steady, his movements precise. He landed on the far side, feet sure on the unstable stone. Without wasting a moment, he secured the rope to another outcrop, creating a solid line stretched across the canyon. Gasps spread through the alien cadets. One whispered, barely loud enough to be heard. He crossed with nothing but rope? Their rifles were powerful, their armor was strong, but all their explosions had only broken the path further. Meanwhile, the human had moved across with speed, silence, and certainty. The commander finally spoke, his voice deep and sharp. Weapons can fail. Ammunition can end. Energy can run dry. But mind, instinct, and will, those are tools that never fail. The cadets shifted uncomfortably. Their laughter had vanished. Pride gave way to unease, then to reluctant respect. For the first time, they began to wonder if the human carried something stronger than their rifles, a way of thinking they could not yet understand. The human stood on the far side of the canyon, rope in hand, waiting. His face remained calm, his eyes steady. To him, this was not a show. It was survival, and the real demonstration was only beginning. The cadets stood at the canyon's edge, their armor covered in dust from their own rifle blasts. Many of them were panting, their pride slowly fading as the unstable stone bridges they had built crumbled again and again into the abyss. The sound of collapsing rocks echoed like laughter from the canyon itself. Across the gap, the human stood calmly. His rope stretched tight between the cliffs, a simple line that defied the chaos. He had already crossed once and returned with the same ease. His body was steady, his face unreadable, as though this deadly canyon was nothing more than a training field back on Earth. Commander Therek raised one hand, signaling for silence. The rifles lowered, the glowing barrels dimmed. The commander's voice carried heavy authority. You think survival is about power. You think destruction builds safety. But survival is about something else. Now you will face the real challenge. He gestured toward the canyon. The winds grew stronger, howling like beasts, tearing loose stones from the cliffs. The cadets squinted as grit stung their eyes. From deep below, the canyon's shadows moved strangely, as if alive. A chill spread through the group. The rule is this, the commander continued. You will cross without destroying. No more reckless fire. No collapsing stone. You will use only what the land gives you. The cadets froze. Without their rifles, what did they have? Their armor was heavy, their training was in weapons, not in hands and ropes. The human stepped forward slowly, rope in hand. He spoke for the first time, his voice calm but firm. The canyon is not your enemy. It is a puzzle. If you fight it, you lose. If you work with it, you win. Some cadets scoffed, unwilling to accept wisdom from someone carrying rope instead of a rifle. But others felt a strange pull in his words. One cadet, tall with scaled skin that shimmered in the sun, stepped forward. His pride made him bold. Prove it. Show us again that your rope is greater than our weapons. The human nodded once. He turned back to the cliff. His eyes scanned every detail, the angle of the rocks, the flow of the wind, the places where stone looked strongest. Then he tied the rope again, tested it, and began to move. This time he did not simply cross. He worked slowly, tying knots along the way, creating footholds in the rope itself. He looped it around two pillars, making a second line parallel to the first. Then he pulled them together, forming a bridge of tension. It was crude, but it was stable. He crossed again, hand over hand, boots finding the rope like steps. His balance was perfect, his patience endless. When he reached the far side, he gestured to the cadets. Your turn. The cadets looked at one another, unsure. The thought of stepping onto that simple rope terrified them more than firing a rifle into the canyon. One cadet muttered, "If I fall, there is no second chance." The human's voice came back across the wind. "If you fall, I will catch you. Trust the rope. Trust your hands. Trust each other." Finally, the scaled cadet who had challenged him stepped up. His claws shook as he gripped the rope. His armored boots slipped at first, but the human's words echoed in his head. Slowly, he moved forward, one step at a time, the rope swaying under his weight. The others watched in silence. Every movement seemed like the edge of disaster. But then, with a final push, the cadet reached the far side. The human reached out a hand and pulled him safely onto the rock. The cadet gasped for air, eyes wide with shock. It worked. It actually worked. The other cadets murmured, disbelief spreading through the group. One by one, they began to step forward. Each tried the rope bridge, their fear shaking them, their pride crumbling. Some slipped, but the human was always there, pulling them steady, teaching them how to tie their own knots, how to use their weight to balance instead of fighting the wind. Minutes turned to hours. Dust covered their armor, sweat dripped from their faces, but slowly the cadets learned. They learned to grip, to pull, to trust. The rifles on their backs felt suddenly useless, just heavy metal when compared to the strength in their own arms. By the time the last cadet crossed, the commander's crimson eyes glowed with approval. He raised his voice once more. You see now, power can break stone, but it cannot build trust. Energy can cut paths, but it cannot hold you when you fall. What this human has shown you is not a trick. It is survival. It is wisdom born from struggle. The cadets stood silently, their arrogance shattered. Some looked at the rope with new respect, while others looked at the human as if seeing him for the first time. The canyon had not been defeated by fire. It had been crossed by courage, patience, and skill. And deep inside, every cadet knew the challenge was far from over. The canyon crossing had changed the mood. The cadets, once loud and arrogant, now stood quieter. Their rifles still glowed with energy, but for the first time they felt heavy, almost unnecessary. The rope bridge stretched across the canyon like a scar, proof that something simple could succeed where power had failed. The human stood at the far side, adjusting the rope, checking each knot as though every detail mattered. His movements were calm, practiced. He made survival look less like luck and more like skill. Yet pride dies slowly. One cadet, his armor scratched from climbing, clenched his rifle tighter. His red eyes glared across the canyon. It was chance, he muttered. The rope worked because the canyon was merciful. Rifles are still stronger. Another cadet, standing nearby, nodded. Yes, what is rope against real power? Their whispers grew, feeding one another's pride. Soon, one of them raised his rifle high, voice echoing over the canyon. Let us prove it. Let us show that our rifles are not weak. The commander did not interfere. His 4 eyes studied the group, silent but watchful. He wanted to see what choice they would make. The human looked back across the rope. His voice carried calmly on the wind. Strength without wisdom is weakness. Do not test the canyon again. But the red-eyed cadet's pride burned too hot. He aimed his rifle at the rope. Energy pulsed, light flared, and a beam shot across. The rope shook violently as the blast struck it. Dust and sparks scattered into the air. Gasps spread among the cadets. The rope frayed, fibers snapping one by one. And then, with a sharp crack, the line broke loose. The cadet who had been halfway across screamed as the rope slipped under his boots. He fell forward, body tumbling toward the abyss. His rifle clattered from his hands, vanishing into the shadows below. In that instant, the human moved. Without hesitation, he leapt onto the collapsing rope, his hands grasping the last strands before they could fully break. His other arm shot out, grabbing the falling cadet's wrist just as the alien's body slipped into open air. The weight dragged at him, the rope fibers tearing into his palms, but his grip did not falter. Muscles strained, breath heavy, yet his eyes stayed focused. "Hold on," he shouted. The cadet's eyes widened in shock. No weapon, no shield, no rifle beam could have saved him. Only the human's raw strength and determination kept him alive. For long seconds, the two hung suspended over the canyon, the abyss waiting below. Dust swirled around them, the wind howled louder, but the human pulled with every ounce of his strength. Slowly, painfully, he dragged the cadet upward. One final pull, one final desperate effort, and both collapsed onto the stone ledge, safe. Silence fell over the canyon. The human lay breathing heavily, his palms raw and bleeding from the rope's bite. The cadet he had saved sat frozen, staring at him with disbelief. His rifle was gone, his pride shattered, but his life remained. The commander's voice finally broke the silence. Deep, calm, unshaken. And now you understand. Your rifles can destroy. But when you needed saving, when death reached for you, it was not your weapon that answered. It was his rope, his hands, and his courage. The cadets lowered their eyes. Their arrogance cracked, replaced by shame. The red-eyed cadet who had fired looked down, his claws trembling. I thought power was enough, he whispered. The human pushed himself to his feet, rope coiled once more in his hands. His voice was steady, though his body showed the strain. Power without control destroys more than it saves. Survival is not about what shines brightest, but what holds strongest. The cadets could not meet his eyes. For the first time, they realized the truth. Their rifles made them feel safe, but they had become slaves to their own weapons. The human, armed with nothing but rope, had proven stronger because he trusted his own will more than any machine. The commander stepped forward, his gaze sweeping the group. Today you saw the difference between dependence and resilience. A weapon can fail. A mind must not. Some cadets bowed their heads in respect. Others clenched their fists, fighting the sting of humiliation. But none could deny what they had witnessed. The rope, though torn and frayed, now looked sacred. It was no longer just rope, it was survival. It was proof. The human looked at the canyon once more, then at the cadets. His face was calm, but his words carried weight. You think weapons make you soldiers. They do not. Weapons only extend what you already are. If you are careless, they destroy. If you are wise, even a rope is enough. The cadets stood in silence, the truth settling deep in their hearts. Their rifles still glowed faintly, but none dared lift them now. For the first time, they began to question everything they had believed about strength. And though the canyon was quiet again, every cadet knew the real test of survival had only just begun. The canyon lay silent after the near disaster. The rope bridge had snapped, half of it dangling into the abyss. Dust still floated in the air where the cadet had almost fallen to his death. Every cadet stood stiff, their rifles heavy in their hands, their pride wounded more deeply than their bodies. The human, hands bleeding from the rope burns, sat quietly on the stone ledge. His chest rose and fell slowly, each breath heavy but steady. He had saved the cadet without hesitation. No weapon had helped, no shield had mattered. Only bare hands and will. Commander Therek's deep voice carried across the canyon. This was the first failure. Not of the rope, not of the canyon. The failure was pride. One cadet trusted his weapon more than his own mind, and almost lost his life. The red-eyed cadet who had fired on the rope lowered his head. His claws scraped against the stone, shame burning in his chest. The others said nothing. They had laughed before. They had mocked the rope, mocked the human. Now none dared to open their mouths. But silence cannot last. Another cadet, younger than the rest, broke it with a trembling voice. Commander, what if we try again? But this time without weapons. The commander's eyes narrowed. He said nothing at first, letting the question hang heavy in the air. Finally, he nodded once. Yes, you will try again. But understand, this time the canyon will not forgive a second failure. The cadets shifted uneasily. The thought of stepping into the stormy winds and unstable cliffs with nothing but rope and their own strength terrified them. For all their training, they had never imagined survival without technology. The human rose slowly, wrapping the frayed rope into a new coil. His palms were raw, blood drying in dark streaks, but his movements were precise. He spoke in a calm voice that carried over the winds. The canyon doesn't care about your pride. It doesn't care about your weapons. It only asks one thing. Do you respect it enough to adapt? The cadets listened, though many still struggled to accept. One of them, a tall warrior with horns curling back from his head, stepped forward. His voice was loud, defiant. Show us again, human. If rope is truly stronger than rifles, then prove it here and now. The human did not answer. Instead, he walked to the edge and studied the broken rope still tied to the far side. He pulled out a second coil from his pack. Unlike the first, this one was thinner, weaker. Gasps spread through the group. "That will never hold," one cadet hissed. But the human only tested the rope's strength with a sharp tug and nodded. Sometimes, the weaker line teaches you more than the strong one. If you can trust what looks fragile, you learn to trust yourselves. With steady hands, he tied the rope to a new anchor and swung it across. The first throw missed. The second caught. The rope stretched tight once again, though it swayed more violently than before under the canyon's wind. The horned cadet laughed harshly. "You expect us to walk on that thread? It will break before the second step." The commander's eyes glowed, his tone sharp. "Then do not step. The lesson is not about reaching the other side. It is about trusting what you fear." The cadets shifted, their pride battling with their fear. Finally, the horned cadet gritted his teeth and stepped forward. He gripped the rope, his heavy armor creaking, and set one foot on the line. The rope dipped, swayed, but held. Step by step, he moved forward, every breath a battle. The others watched, tension thick in the air. The cadet wobbled, arms flailing, nearly slipping into the abyss. Collective gasp rose. But somehow he steadied himself. One more step, then another. Sweat poured from his brow, claws tearing at the rope. He made it halfway and then his boot slipped. He screamed as his body fell sideways. Only his grip on the rope saved him from tumbling into the dark. His legs dangled in the air, his body swinging wildly. The human's voice cut through the panic. "Do not fight it. The rope is alive with the wind. Move with it, not against it." The cadet, eyes wide with fear, tried to calm his breathing. He loosened his stiff body, letting the rope sway beneath him. Slowly, shakily, he found his balance again. Inch by inch, he climbed back up, until his boots were on the line once more. The other cadets held their breath as he crawled forward. Finally, with one last desperate push, he reached the far side and collapsed, gasping. The canyon was silent again. The commander's voice boomed. "This is the lesson of failure. Weapons can give you false courage, but fear teaches you truth. Today you saw both. You will remember it, or you will not survive the worlds ahead." The cadets lowered their rifles to the ground, no longer glowing with pride. They looked at the rope, not with laughter, not with scorn, but with the heavy respect born of fear and survival. The human coiled the rope once more, his hands steady despite the pain. He did not smile, did not boast. To him, it was not victory. It was only survival. And though the cadets had crossed, they knew deep down, the canyon had not truly been defeated. It had only spared them once more. The first failure would not be the last. The canyon trial had shaken the cadets. Their armor was scratched, their pride wounded, and their rifles felt less like weapons of power and more like heavy burdens. Each cadet had now touched the rope. Some had stumbled, some had nearly fallen, and all had learned that survival was not as simple as pressing a trigger. But the commander was not finished. His crimson eyes scanned the group with a sharp gleam. "The canyon is not conquered by a single rope," he said. "It demands more. It demands thought." The human stood silently at the cliff's edge, his rope coiled once more. His hands were raw, his palms blistered, yet his focus was unbroken. He looked across the abyss as though measuring every shadow, every gust of wind, every shifting stone. Then he crouched down and began tying knots, different ones faster, more complex. The cadets watched with narrow eyes. To them, the knots looked strange and meaningless, but the human worked with steady confidence. Soon he had tied small loops into the rope, spaced carefully apart. Then, with another coil, he created a second line, looping it with the first. "What is he doing?" one cadet whispered. Another muttered, "More tricks, more primitive games." The commander's voice silenced them. "Watch and learn." The human slung the rope across again, securing it around 2 stone pillars on either side of the canyon. But this time, instead of one swaying line, there were 2 parallel ropes pulled tight, connected by small knots like rungs of an invisible ladder. The cadets gasped. It was not a simple bridge. It was a rope path, strong enough for both hands and feet. The human tested it first. He placed one foot on the lower rope, gripped the upper one with his hands, and moved steadily across, his body balanced, his weight spread evenly. The wind tugged at him, dust blew in his eyes, but the ropes held strong. With calm focus, he reached the other side, then turned and called out. This way, even the weak can cross. Not every soldier is built for climbing. But with knots, with patience, all can survive. The cadets stood stunned. Some exchanged uncertain glances. Their rifles could tear through walls of steel, but none of them had thought to tie ropes in this way. None had imagined that survival meant not just saving yourself, but helping others who might be weaker. One of the younger cadets stepped forward nervously. His claws trembled as he reached for the ropes. Will it hold me?" he asked. The human nodded. "The rope is only as strong as the one who trusts it. Hold tight. Breathe steady. Move with it." The young cadet obeyed. Step by step he crossed. His movements were clumsy at first, but the knots gave him places to rest, to catch his breath. By the time he reached the far side, his eyes were wide, not with fear, but with wonder. Others followed. Some strong, some weak, but all learning. The ropes swayed under their weight, yet the knots gave them rhythm, a way to move together. Soon half the cadets were across. The rope bridge was alive with their movement, swaying like a living creature. And through it all, the human moved among them, steady and calm, guiding hands, tightening knots, showing them how to share the burden. "This is what ingenuity means," the commander said, his voice low but powerful. "Not destruction, creation. Not only crossing for yourself, but making a way for others." The cadets paused, hearing his words. Their rifles had never been meant to help one another. They were tools of war, of killing. Yet here was rope, turned into a lifeline, a bridge, a lesson. The red-eyed cadet who had once fired on the rope stepped forward at last. Shame still burned in him, but he clenched his fists and spoke. "Let me try." The human said nothing. He only held the rope steady as the cadet climbed on. This time, there was no mockery in the cadet's face. His eyes were sharp, his breath steady. Step by step, he moved forward, learning to trust the knots, learning to move with the wind. When he finally reached the far side, he did not boast. He simply placed his rifle on the ground and bowed his head slightly to the human. The commander's gaze softened, though his tone remained stern. "Do you see now? Ingenuity is the weapon of survivors. Where fire destroys, patience builds. Where power fails, wisdom endures." The cadets were silent, but inside their thoughts shifted. They had come believing rifles were their pride, their power, their future. But now they began to wonder if perhaps the rope, simple and silent, carried something far greater. The human coiled the ropes again, his movements precise, his face calm. To him, it was no victory. It was simply what humans had always done. Finding ways where none existed, surviving where survival seemed impossible. And though the cadets did not yet know it, this lesson of rope and ingenuity would mark them forever. For the first time, they were beginning to understand why humanity, small, fragile, and weaponless compared to so many races, was still feared, still respected, still impossible to defeat. The canyon was no longer just a trial ground. It had become a classroom. Dust still floated in the wind, the ropes swayed gently between the cliffs, and the cadets stood silent, their rifles forgotten at their sides. What they had seen humbled them. For the first time, they realized survival was not about destroying the world in front of them but learning how to live with it. Commander Therek, who had watched everything without expression, finally stepped forward. His crimson eyes glowed in the shifting sunlight, and the cadets straightened instinctively. His voice cut through the silence like a blade. "You have seen what a rope can do. You have seen how one human crossed where your rifles failed. But survival is not just about yourself. It is about others. A soldier alone may fight, but a soldier who carries the weak, that one keeps armies alive." The cadets exchanged uneasy glances. They knew the commander never spoke in riddles. His words meant another test was coming. Sure enough, Therek lifted one of his forearms and pointed to 3 cadets near the back. Smaller, weaker, less trained. Their bodies were slim, their armor too large for them. They lowered their heads in shame, already fearing what would come. "These 3 will cross," the commander declared. "But they will not cross alone. Human, you will take them with you. No rifles. No weapons. Only rope and your will." The courtyard filled with whispers. Some cadets shook their heads. It was impossible. Carrying the weak would only slow them down. The canyon winds were cruel, the cliffs unstable. Even with ropes, the task was madness. The human said nothing. He looked at the 3 cadets, then at the canyon, and finally back at the commander. His calm face gave no sign of fear, only acceptance. "Then we begin," he said quietly. He gathered the ropes once more, his blistered hands moving with practiced skill. This time, he tied harnesses from the lines, loops strong enough to hold a body if it slipped. He fastened one to each of the 3 weaker cadets, showing them how to secure the knots. Their eyes were wide, their movements clumsy, but his voice guided them patiently. "Do not fight the rope," he said. "Trust it. Trust me." The stronger cadets stood back, watching with curiosity and doubt. Many were certain the human would fail, yet a part of them wanted to see him succeed because if he did, it would mean survival was bigger than power, bigger than pride. The human tied himself last, connecting his line to all 3 cadets. If one fell, he would feel the weight of all of them. He knew the risk, but his hands moved without hesitation. Then, step by step, they began to cross. The first gust of wind nearly knocked one of the smaller cadets off the rope. He screamed, arms flailing, but the harness held. The sudden pull yanked at the human's body, almost dragging him down. His muscles strained, veins rising in his arms, but he held firm, shouting over the roar of the wind. "Breathe. Do not fight. Use the knots." The cadet calmed, his claws gripping the knots with trembling strength. Slowly, he steadied himself and the group moved again. The second cadet slipped next, armor too heavy for his thin frame. He dangled helplessly, but the rope system the human had tied held him like a net. The human pulled him up, step by step, sweat pouring from his brow. The stronger cadets on the far side watched in silence, their own pride shrinking with each moment. The third cadet almost lost courage halfway across. His body froze, his eyes locked on the abyss below. He could not move forward, could not step again. The human leaned close, his voice low but steady. "Do not look down. Look at me. One step, then another. That is all survival asks of you." The cadet's breathing slowed. He moved a foot forward, then another. The rope swayed, but the knots guided him, and the human's steady presence kept him from falling. Together, step by step, they crossed. By the time they reached the far side, the 3 weak cadets collapsed in exhaustion, but they were alive. The human untied the harnesses, his hands bleeding anew from the strain. He said nothing of his pain, only checked each of the cadets to make sure they were safe. The canyon fell silent again. Every cadet watched, not with arrogance, but with something new, respect. Commander Therek's voice carried heavy across the wind. "You have seen power. You have seen fear. And now you have seen sacrifice. This human has shown you what survival truly means. It is not strength alone. It is not weapons alone. It is the will to carry others when they cannot carry themselves." The cadets lowered their heads. Some clenched their fists, ashamed of how they had mocked. Others felt pride burn away inside them, replaced by something stronger, humility. The commander turned his gaze back to the human. For the first time, his hard expression softened. "Human, you have passed the test. But more than that, you have given these cadets a lesson no weapon can ever teach." The human coiled the ropes again, slow and steady. To him, this was not victory, not glory. It was only what had to be done. That was the way of survival. And though the test was complete, the cadets knew deep inside that something greater had begun. They would never look at rope or at humans the same way again. The canyon was quiet now. The winds had softened, as if the land itself had grown tired of testing them. Dust settled on broken rocks, and the last echoes of struggle faded into silence. The cadets stood in a line once more, but they were not the same group who had mocked at the start. Their shoulders no longer carried arrogance. Their eyes no longer burned with pride. Something inside them had shifted. The human stood apart, the coil of rope once again in his hands. It was frayed, scarred, and stained with his blood. Yet to the cadets it looked more powerful than their glowing rifles. It was no longer just rope. It was proof of something they had almost forgotten. Survival was not about who had the brightest weapon, but who had the strongest will. Commander Therex stepped forward, his heavy boots striking the stone with authority. His 4 arms folded behind him, and his crimson eyes scanned the cadets. He let the silence stretch, forcing every one of them to feel the weight of the day. "Cadets," his voice finally boomed, "you came here with pride. You came here believing your weapons made you soldiers. You believed power alone was survival. And you failed." The words cut deep. The cadets lowered their heads in shame. Some gritted their teeth, some clenched their claws, but none dared to argue. Therex's voice grew sharper. "You mocked the human. You mocked his rope. Yet it was the rope that crossed the canyon. It was the rope that carried the weak. It was the rope that saved one of you from death. And what did your rifles do? They broke the path. They nearly killed you." The red-eyed cadet who had fired at the rope flinched, shame burning on his face. He wanted to disappear, but he forced himself to stay still, to bear the commander's words. Then Therex's voice softened, though it carried even more weight. "The human showed you something greater than power. He showed you ingenuity. He showed you patience. He showed you courage. And most of all, he showed you what it means to be responsible for more than yourself." The cadets looked at the human now. Their eyes were not mocking. They were not doubtful. They were full of something unfamiliar, respect. Some even felt gratitude. The human said nothing. He simply stood quietly, his hands resting on the rope. To him, this was not a moment of glory. It was simply survival, the same survival humans had practiced on their harsh homeworld for generations. He did not see himself as a hero. He was only doing what had to be done. The commander raised one arm and gave his final order of the day. "From this moment, every cadet will carry 2 things. Your rifle and a rope. The rifle reminds you of power. The rope reminds you of wisdom. One without the other will bring only failure. But together, they may keep you alive." Gasps spread through the group. For generations, rifles had been the symbol of the academy. To add something as simple as rope alongside them felt strange, almost unbelievable. But deep inside, the cadets understood. They had seen the proof with their own eyes. Slowly, each cadet stepped forward, one by one, and placed their hand on the rope in the human's grasp. It was a silent gesture, an unspoken vow that they would not forget what they had learned. The human did not speak. He only nodded once, acknowledging them. When the red-eyed cadet's turn came, he hesitated. Shame weighed heavily on him, heavier than his armor. He bowed his head as he touched the rope. "I mocked you," he whispered, "and you still saved me. I will not forget." The human's answer was simple. "Then remember not for me. Remember for the one you saved tomorrow." The words struck the cadet harder than any punishment could have. He stepped back, eyes burning. Not with pride, but with determination. The commander ended the trial with one final declaration. "You came here thinking today was about weapons, but today was about survival. And survival is not taught by fire and steel. It is taught by rope and blood, by patience and courage, by the will to endure when all else fails. That is what this human has given you. Remember it well. For one day, your life will depend on it." The cadets raised their heads. They felt changed, as though the canyon itself had carved new strength into their bones. They would never forget the lesson. The human coiled the rope for the last time that day, his hands steady despite the pain. He looked out across the canyon, its shadows deep and endless, and then back at the cadets. His eyes were calm, his voice quiet, but his words carried into every heart. Technology makes you soldiers, but it is will, ingenuity, and courage that make you survivors. Remember that when the rifles fail, and they will. The rope rested in his hands like a banner of survival. The cadets stood straighter, their arrogance gone, replaced by something deeper. Respect, humility, and a new kind of pride. The kind built not on weapons, but on the strength to endure. The canyon had given them a lesson, and the human had shown them how to hear it. From that day forward, no cadet at the academy ever laughed at rope again. They carried it with their rifles not as a tool, but as a reminder. A reminder that survival is not about the weapon you hold. It is about the courage you carry.